So their presentation will feature 5 favorite herbs that represent different strengths from a resiliency model developed right here at UT School of Social Work. Karen developed a model when she was at UT's Institute of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. She's now a national consultant who creates resources for those who work with traumatized populations like child welfare, first responders, and victim services. She was even honored with the prestigious National Crime Victim Service Award in 2015. Our other speaker, Stephanie, describes herself as a social justice warrior, an artist, a reader, and an occasional gardener. But I've seen her amazing raised keyhole garden and beautiful yard, so more than occasional. She says she's got a real job dealing with crime, trauma, and other hard topics. So making clay garden markers and other yard art and running her hands through her herb garden are happy antidotes. Though before they start, some good news is you will get a copy of this presentation, the slides, and all the recipes too, so you can sit back, relax, and enjoy. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Karen and Stephanie and the Resilient Gardener.
Thank you, Carla. Stephanie and I are so happy to be here today. This is a subject we really enjoy talking about. We were talking beforehand that we haven't done it in a long time. And it's really nice for us to have the opportunity to do it as part of the Austin Herb Society non-soup social. All right. Okay, well, let's start first of all by thinking about what resiliency is. The definition of resiliency is that you have the ability to bounce back from adversity. That sounds interesting. It sounds like something is going on and you're able to bounce back. But when you're not being resilient, what does that feel like? This is where we want you to start doing the chat that Aline described. How do you know when you're not resilient? What signs do you see? My signs are my poor mint crying out for water or some kind of attention. Because if my mint looks like this means I am just not out in the garden very much. So it's a clear sign for me that I'm not being my resilient self. So put in the chat what some of your signs are. Your sleep gets wonky. You get cranky. We did this one time and somebody said their spouse tells them they're cranky. Anxiety and insomnia. Watching a lot of TV instead of going outside. Fatigue, sadness, messy house, feeling overwhelmed or forgetful. Your neck goes out. Yes, there can be very much physical reactions when we're not being our resiliency self. Well, if resiliency is something that you bounce back, is your ability to bounce back, what is it you're bouncing back to? What is your firm foundation, as Bob Dylan would sing, when the winds of changes shift? That's where the 5 core elements come in that we're going to talk to you about. If my clicker will only work. I'm not stressing at that at all, though. The 5 core elements are a model that was developed here at the University of Texas by a team of researchers and practitioners. The 5 core elements come from research that shows what are strengths in individuals who are resilient. Think of these 5 core elements as muscles that all work really, really well together. While each muscle might have its own unique purpose, they all work best when each one is firing and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the good news is that if one isn't working as well as it should and contributing to your resiliency, there are things that you can do to make you more resilient so that thing is really working for you to help you get that bounce back quality. We're going to tell you all about the 5 core elements. We're going to tell you what you can do to cultivate them in yourself. And of course, we're going to find a clever way to connect them to herbs and soup. So let's get going. The first core element is self-knowledge and insight. If self-knowledge and insight is a resiliency strength for you, these are the characteristics you have. You have self-esteem. You know who you are and you like that person. It's interesting that parsley represents useful knowledge because you know what you know. You want to feel that what you know, the knowledge that you have is useful to people. And you really like to share that knowledge. You're driven by your values, and you may have chosen a particular job because it fits what you believe and what you're good at. Sometimes you say that job chose you. You were born to do it, and you gain a lot of your self-esteem from that ability to do that job well. Having self-knowledge and insight also means you have an inner locus of control. You know what is yours to do. You respect boundaries, and you have the confidence to know what needs to be done. You know what it is that is yours to do, and you do that. You also know that there are some things that cannot be fixed, but those that are yours to take care of, you are ready to go for it. And that's where independence comes in. You need to be in a position to act. You do not like to be micromanaged or caught in a situation where you can't do what is yours to do. And by golly, you've got the know-how to do it because somebody is standing in your way. If this happens, you feel stressed. You feel that your knowledge is not valued and you're not able to do what it is that you're supposed to do. Another thought that Stephanie brought to us from herbal folklore is that the person who successfully grows our herb that represents this, parsley, is the dominant person in the household. I think that I have lived a little bit of this herbal folklore. The person who successfully grows parsley is the dominant person in the household. Sometimes I have found that my wanting to share what I know with people makes me come off as a know-it-all. Maybe it's my being from New England where people are very direct, or from a big Greek family where if you don't speak up, you don't get heard. But what I saw as a strength was hurting me because people thought I was just being bossy, not knowledgeable. When self-knowledge and insight is a strength for you, you know how to balance this. You have insight that something is not coming off right in what it is you are doing, and you learn from that experience. You use your insight to adjust, and you're smart enough to make the changes that need to be made so that a strength that you have does not become a weakness. So here's some other ideas of how you cultivate this thing called self-knowledge. I want you to tell me something in the chat about yourself. Tell me a value that guides who you are, that makes you you. But here's a little challenge to this exercise. The word that you use to describe yourself has to match the letter of your first name, like knowledgeable Karen, not that know-it-all Karen, or friendly Francis, or just Janet. So go ahead and put in the chat an adjective that describes who you are and introduce yourself to us now as your strong self, as your resilient self. Who is that? Let's see some of those alliterations coming into the chat box. Anti-establishment, Aline. Oh my God, she wins the prize for using the most letters in her adjective. I can see that. Light to the mind, Lucinda. Oh, how poetic. See how each of these are really, these are describing the people we know, aren't they? Jokester Janet, yes. Enthusiastic Elaine, I have certainly seen that in you. Sensible Sylvia. Who else do we have here? Oh, yes, Keen Kate. Let's have a few more. Reflection is such a big part of this. Steady, Suzanne, I have counted on that. Magical Marge, just live every day, Judy. And Simply Susan, Daring Diane. Isn't this fun? This is part of your resiliency practice, knows her stuff, Carla. is to be able to identify who you are, what your strengths are, and what are the things that are going to serve you in your resiliency journey. So you have just taken the first step to make the self-knowledge and insight piece work a little bit more for you by identifying who that person is. The other thing you want to do to cultivate self-knowledge and insight is to honor the boundaries and areas of influence. You are only going to get stressed if you try to fix things that are not yours to fix, or try to do things that you're not able to. As the gardener, I have to learn to try not to get my lilies to bloom for Greek Easter, which always comes about a month later than everybody else's Easter. But I want my lilies to be Greek Easter lilies. But by golly, I'll just take those lilies whenever they come, because it's not in my area of influence. So the last lesson on how to cultivate self-knowledge and insight is to stay in gardens that are matched between you, your knowledge, your mission, and your values, because you live your life, you do everything that you do because of who you are and the values that guide you. And when you get yourself into a position where you are not living your values, then you are not going to have self-knowledge and insight working for you, and you are not going to be resilient. So that's the end of the first core element. And of course, we're going to wrap it up with a recipe. I love this recipe that Carla brought to us for making a soup with parsley, a beautiful carrot, parsley, and cumin soup. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to take us through the next one, the sense of hope.
Yes, the second core element is sense of hope. And the features of a sense of hope include optimism, a sense of humor, and an ability to have fun. And we've chosen dill, as it represents happiness, as the herb that maybe incorporates a sense of hope. I'll tell you, optimism is not a new line of research, but there has been kind of a resurgence in social studies, social sciences around the topic of optimism. And we know this, research shows us that optimists, people who are optimistic, tend to be healthier, they tend to live longer, they're less stressed, and they're less depressed. So while it's outside the scope of this particular conversation, the good news is pessimists, or people who tend to track more towards pessimism, can actually change, can become more optimistic with a little bit of help. So it's possible to train yourself to be more optimistic. A second feature of a sense of hope is a good sense of humor. And I will tell you, I think gardeners especially need to have a good sense of humor, because things happen that, as Karen said, are sometimes by and large outside of our sense of our ability to control. So finding it funny or finding the humor in it is an important way of coping with it. Humor is linked to optimism. People who can find the funny are just like optimists. They tend to be healthier, and wait for it, people who have a sense of humor tend to be perceived as more physically attractive. So, think of that as your beauty regime for the week. It's interesting that the benefits of humor are actually found across all kinds of humor. So if you're like me, where your first language is sarcasm, or you tend to go toward a dry sense of humor, or you're more, lean to a dark sense of humor, the research suggests that all of those kinds of humor have value. The only thing that we have to be aware of is there are some kinds of humor that can wound, and we just have to be more careful about where we use it and the context and the people around us when we use them. But in terms of personal benefit, they're all equal. Of course, a part of humor is the ability to laugh. And we know that laughter has a physiological benefit to us, both our mental health and our physical health. When something strikes you as funny, and you start to laugh, there's increased arousal inside of your body. There's increased muscle tension, your respiration rate, your heart rate goes up for just a moment, momentarily. And then as you laugh, all of that is released. All of the muscles that you don't need to laugh are released. That is why when you see little kids laughing, like, you know, in a YouTube video or in a playground or something like that, if kids laugh hard enough, they will physically fall down because their muscles will simply give way. And those of us who are a little older may find that if we laugh really hard, other muscles give way, and we all know what we're talking about. People are pointing out that one way to cultivate a sense of humor is funny videos on Facebook or YouTube. Absolutely. You can create humorous environments for yourself when you, especially if you need that in the moment. Old Johnny Carson videos or old comedian videos are a great way to do that. Our ability to have fun. People who can have fun find that it improves relationships. Believe it or not, it makes us smarter. There's a stress reduction element in our ability to have fun, and it introduces new ideas that maybe researchers think that might be what it is about our ability to have fun that actually might make us smarter, is because people who have fun and look for ways to have fun are also open to new ideas and new experiences. And so they continue to learn things. Our ability to have fun reduces stress. And interestingly enough, it helps to balance hormones. So again, there's social benefit to a sense of hope. There's physiological benefit. There's emotional benefit, all kinds of things. So speaking of dill, one of the reasons, you can go to the next slide, Karen, that dill supports a sense of hope and a sense of humor is not just because it's so zesty, but potentially because it also can prevent unfortunate gastrointestinal problems. So if you can't find the funny in that, maybe your sense of humor is something that you can work on a little bit. So I would invite you to, given those elements, what are things that give you a sense of hope? Where do you find hope? Somebody has said in intentionally watching things that are funny and optimistic. What gives you a sense of hope? Grandkids, most definitely. Watching my garden grow, yes. Springtime. Oh, classic Carol Burnett. What are other things? Things that come back from the dead, resurrection, nature, talking with friends. Even really dark humor, exactly. Seeing people help others. And that's interesting, Carla, because we're going to talk about altruism in a little bit. Birds at the feeders, yes. So good. So this was not difficult. Most of you, cats, yes, I'm a cat person. Beautiful music, going for a walk. It seems like people were pretty easily able to connect with something that gives them hope, gives them optimism, moving forward in a new direction. I personally like to learn how to do something new. Right now, I'm building little shelves for my essential oils, and the ability, my belief in myself that I can create something that I've never created before. And there are moments of humor in it too, I can tell you. But how do we cultivate a sense of hope if that's something that we want to work on or to reflect on a little bit more mindfully? Well, one is to make hope visible. And one way we do that is to think about the future. And I think that gardeners are uniquely able to do that. I mean, one of you said spring gives you a sense of hope, and that's very much about envisioning the future. Our grandkids are about envisioning the future. You know, thinking about what's coming, that's possible, that's positive, things that you thought were dead that come back to life, believing that we can help make that happen, that we can solve garden problems. That's all part of making hope. Planting a seed, good heavens, yes, Diane, that's the classic act of hope. Counting your blessings. I will tell you, there is a very, you've seen it. I mean, it's just everywhere. There's a very large body of literature around gratitude and appreciating the things that you have. And I would just say that if you make one sort of concrete change as a result of this morning's meeting, that you just find yourself a tablet or a little notebook, a pen, put it by your bedside table, and every night before you turn off the light, just jot down 2 or 3 things that you appreciate. You know, they don't have to be big things. It could be that, you know, that you got dinner on the table, that you got to talk with a friend, that you actually got most of your to-do list checked off today. What are you grateful for? What are your blessings for the day? We find in the research that people who cultivate a sense of gratitude show significantly, and I emphasize that, not just increased mental health, but significantly increased mental health. We also find that people who engage in some kind of a gratitude exercise sleep better, are more creative, are happier, and report having better relationships. So getting into an attitude of gratitude has definite positive benefits for those who engage in that. And then plan for fun. And unsurprisingly, the older we get, the harder that is. Probably because of time. Certainly now with our inability to move as freely as we used to get with friends, that may be a little bit more difficult. But as you plan your day, think about, what can I do today that I would really get a kick out of? What would be fun? And see if you can engage in that. So those are some ideas, some seeds for how to cultivate a sense of hope, if that's something that you want to work on, that being one of the 5 core elements. And here is creamy cauliflower dill soup that you will, of course, get the recipe for when you receive these slides. So back to you, Karen. You're on mute, darling.
Thank you, Stephanie. One of the things I am going to send out to you all along with this slide presentation is some of the suggestions that have appeared in the chat about videos to watch on YouTube and whatnot. So you'll have a complete list of that, and also some books that Stephanie and I have found useful so that you'll be able to incorporate all of those into your new resiliency practice. You know, the next core element is healthy coping. And one of the things that I really like about the 5 core elements is that once you're aware of what they are, you start seeing signs of them everywhere and find different things that you can incorporate into your practice. Like on a Southwest Airlines flight, if you can remember the last time you got to be on a plane, they have these lovely little cocktail napkins that say, "Welcome to a plane full of yes in a world full of no." Well, if that's not about optimism and positivity and focusing on the future, and also they tell you to put your own oxygen mask on first, then that's certainly a big part of healthy coping. Well, the way a new thing came to me to add to my practice was on Saturday while I was working on this presentation, I was listening to Hidden Brain. Does anybody listen to that on Saturdays on NPR? And the speaker was a fellow named William Irvin, who published a book called Stoicism. And Stoicism is all about healthy coping. You know, I'm Greek, so I've got to throw a little bit of Greek in here. So we're going to take one lesson from the Stoics And this is what the Stoics would say about healthy coping. You do what you can with what you have where you can. Don't waste time focusing on the bad thing that happened, the thing you cannot change, but on what you can do next. And that, my friends, is commitment to the truth. That is how the Stoics would tell us to practice healthy coping. Empathic attunement is building your emotional immune system. Learn from your past stressors that the Stoic gods are sending to test you. Because every time we overcome some kind of challenge, we've got a new muscle. We know how to take care of that crisis again in the future, and we're stronger for it. We all have stress. We know what it feels like, and we know what works for us. So share your ideas on managing stress, just as you share your ideas on managing gardens with other people. You can learn from others, and they learn from you as part of this empathic attunement. An intentional practice, the last part of healthy coping, is the Nike challenge, folks. Just do it. Put your knowledge and commitment together to your own well-being and just do it. Yeah, it takes activity, it takes bravery, and it takes strength, as our little time here would tell us, but you can do it and you must do it. Time comes from the Greek word phemon, which also gives us the word fumigate, which means to get rid of things that, are not good. So it's a protective herb. And the herbal folklore tells us that fairies love thyme. So put a whole bunch of that around, because who wouldn't feel more protected if you had fairies about? This picture here is the fairy house that John Fine and Roberta Showerman make for us. They take care of putting an Austin Herb Society fairy house every year on the Woodland Fairy Trail. Isn't this just magical? And so one of the suggestions we have for cultivating healthy coping is put that time out there and attract the fairies to your area, but mainly take time for self-care. And I'm so sorry about that pun, but I couldn't resist it. One of the things that can cause us the most stress is not having control of our schedules. And so what happens when something throws us off? What is the first thing we drop from our schedule? It's the walk we were going to take. It's the visit we were going to have with friends. It was the thing that was going to really contribute to our health. That's what we drop. So we need to have a schedule that we are important in and that it doesn't disappear. I always say that I put things in my book in violet, and they actually go into the book in purple, which means they cannot be removed. These are my things to do. These are my practices. And if I ever go back and put a yellow through it, it means I did not do the thing that I was supposed to do that was going to be good for me. So spend time with people and things that feed your soul. Find those people that are good for you and help you, give you these ideas about different things to do. My walking buddy, Francis, who many of you know is an Austin Herb Society member, has taught me so much about resiliency. When we were walking the other day and talking about this thing, she gave me a new saying: what we resist persists. So I walked away from, a walk in the woods with a new little resiliency thing. So intentional practice is about all of that. And you know what? Your mother was right when she hit the key points about how we take care of ourselves in mind, body, and soul. Eating the right food matters. Yes, sometimes food can be fun, but food is really fuel and our body needs it. I do like this little thing, this rationale here. Chocolate comes from cocoa, which is a tree that makes it a plant. So chocolate is a salad. So you can use that now and then, but be careful about how you are using food to cope with stress. My coping with stress is hitting a P. Terry's for the burger and fries. Not so good as a salad. Having too many glasses of wine to calm down. So really make sure that you are using food to really support yourself. And yes, rest is key to resiliency. Have you ever been in that position? You don't know whether to take a nap or cry about being tired. And you're just going to hear it over and over again. Exercise is an important way to get rid of that stress that's adding up in your body. One of the main teachers in the whole idea of tending to your spirit is John Cabot Zinn, who came up with the idea of mindfulness, the whole practice of mindfulness. In 1979, John Cabot Zinn recruited chronically ill patients that weren't responding well to traditional treatments and had them participate in his newly formed 8-week stress reduction program, which we now call mindfulness-based stress reduction. And just recently, I saw a survey of different practices that people promote for well-being, and any practice that included mindfulness was one of the ones that were most effective and efficient for people. That being said, mindfulness isn't for everybody. And so pick something that works for you. Inner peace cannot be rushed. And so pick a practice that will really work for what you need. And I put a couple of books up here that I've also found very useful. Kristen Neff, another UT connection, has a really good book on self-compassion. And sometimes we spend a little bit more time being compassionate to others and not self-compassionate to ourselves. She has a really good TED Talk on that. And another book that's my favorite is by Elizabeth Gilbert, who you might remember wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She has a wonderful book called Big Magic, and it's all about creativity. One of the best ways to build resiliency is to practice creativity. You might have heard that when your hands are busy doing things like knitting, weeding in the garden, it frees your mind up for other things, right? Your mind gets to rest, and that's when new creative things come in. And that can increase your creativity, your flexibility, and your peace of mind. And there's your soup that you get to make with thyme, which Carla has the extra ingredient in for protection, not only thyme, but garlic. We've talked a lot about relationships and the important role that they play in being able to support our resiliency. The characteristics of those for people who have strong relationships as a resiliency strength, they have attachments to others. It's what Maslow identified in his hierarchy of needs as belonging, or in a non-researchy way, people need people. It works best when you both give support to others and ask for support for yourself. And if a relationship is not working, you do something about it. One of the new practices that the UT team added to this resiliency model is the idea of speaking up for a change. So the herb that we have here is rosemary. And even though rosemary is often thought of in connection with bereavement, it actually increases circulation to the brain and may help consolidate happy memories. So maybe that's why rosemary is what we think about in association with remembrance. So strong relationships are really easy to think about having, and the good memories that come from good relationships, right? This one is easy when the strengths you have, your family, your friends, your workmates, your garden club friends are all there to support you. I put this little picture up on Facebook page whenever my sister is coming over, because that is exactly how I feel when she's coming. But it's a jungle out there. And what do you do when something that should support you causes you stress instead? Sometimes things can get tough in the garden, like these praying mantises that are having a standoff before one eats the other. Sometimes we have weeds in our garden that just take over and choke everything else out. Sometimes we have people in our lives that instead of that relationship fueling us, it depletes us. It takes over. It eats us alive and really depletes our resiliency. It can be particularly trying when the relationship is one we want to maintain, but not at the risk of our own happiness, well-being, and resiliency. So what you need to do is act with fidelity and love, stay true to your values, and speak up. Try to change what's happening in that relationship that is not contributing to the relationship. So if you would, I would like to hear a little bit about what you do when a relationship that should support you is causing you stress instead. And a good little tip there that Lucinda just shared about students who smell rosemary before a test do better on the test. It strengthens the memory. It helps connect. I'd heard that too. So give us some tips here, folks. What do you do when something that should support you causes you stress instead? Cry. Hey, release that tension, right? There's nothing wrong with saying this is really bad and just get it all out. Flee from it, run from it, which isn't a good thing. Loyalty is one of my key values. So relationship going south is really difficult for me. That can be really hard. And that's when part of what we need to do is saying, has this relationship passed its time? Just like we look at things sometime in the garden and say, you know, I've done everything I can, but this just isn't going to make it in my garden, and having to make that. I try to communicate the stress with someone or with the folks involved. That is the brave thing to do. It is hard, but that's part of what needs to be done. That's what we're talking about, speaking up from a change, because if you don't, yes, Suzanne, look at it from a different perspective, try to understand what their perspective is. Sometimes I find that what I think is going on with that person in their reaction to me isn't what's really going on. And when I've had that opportunity to sit down and talk through it, we come to a better understanding about what we're each doing. Isolate. That's good, but also to hear you say you're working on that. Remember that each part of life is a chapter in our book, and not all the characters are major players. Oh, I love that. Well, what the Stoics would advise us is this. If someone makes a negative remark to you, you ignore them. That takes away their power. If you keep focusing on it and them, it festers, it bursts into a flame, and you can't stop what they send our way, but we can choose how we respond and what we will accept. But don't let it go on. I've got one book I really recommend called Crucial Conversations. That's conversations that start with the heart, because these are relationships that you want to maintain. And it offers some really good tips about being able to do that, to take care of that. And practice kind accountability. We don't tolerate bullies in the schoolyard or in our gardens. And so it's really important that we be brave enough to speak up for that. Now, most of the references that Stephanie and I have been using have been plants and animals and things in the garden, but I want to share this one too. In the trainings that I've done around the country, I've had the opportunity to present the 5 core elements in tribal communities. And I've learned so much from them when they tell me about some practices that they do that relate to the 5 core elements, like using smudging. We've heard about smudging and sweat lodges. Well, that can also be a way of getting rid of negativity. I went to a training out in California, and there was a Navajo man there that talked about taking care of the net. His message was very simple. If each one of us takes care of our part of the net when we are stressed, then the whole net will be healthy and strong. What happens when we are stressed? Most often, we take it out on our loved ones and the people who are next to us, and the people who really have nothing to do with what is causing the stress sometimes. And so if instead what we do is take care of our part of the net and everybody else is taking part of theirs, and we're giving support to people and asking for support when we need it, then we can all be part of a strong and healthy relationship or network of people. So there's a little bit of advice for you from the Navajo too, for your resiliency practice. And we have a rosemary soup. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to be able to try out all of these recipes. And so we're going to go back to Stephanie now for the last of the 5 core elements.
And that is personal perspective and meaning. And this links actually right back to the first core element, which was self-knowledge and insight. And Karen and I, when we were talking last night, she said something that made a lot of sense to me. She said that self-knowledge and insight gives us the what, personal perspective and meaning gives us the why. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the why in a minute. But the three characteristics of this core element are morality and integrity, spirituality, and a coherent life meaning. And of course, by morality and integrity, we're talking about a moral code that you live by, maybe a little bit different from what somebody else does, but that it's your moral code, and your life, your gardening, everything else is a reflection of that. You know what you stand for. Well, I learned at a training, and I just find this fascinating. The root word of integrity is the root word that gives us the word integer. An integer, of course, if you remember your math without getting an eye twitch like I do, is anything that it's a whole number. It's a number that cannot be divided. It's not a fraction. It's a whole number. And I like thinking about integrity through that context. We typically think about integrity as sort of acting right, but integrity is also acting with consistency. That you are a whole, you're not divided, you're not a fraction. The person that you are in one context is the same person you are in another context. You don't have necessarily different moral codes for different people, different environments, different organizations. So I like to think about that broadened definition of integrity. It means being a whole person. Your spirituality, of course, is whatever view of a higher power is meaningful to you, whether that's a more traditional sense or a less traditional sense of spirituality, but just appreciating things that are beyond our power and perhaps necessarily our understanding. And I do wonder how one can garden without some sense of spirituality and appreciation for all of the elements that go into that, many of which are out of our control and appear to come from a power greater than ours. And then, a personal life meaning, whether that's your own, I'm trying to think of the word, your own mission statement or how that works for you. Mark Twain once said that the two most important days of someone's life is the day they were born and the day they understand why. And indeed, that's where we get our coherent life meaning, is when we know the why of why we are here. We've selected the word sage. You can go to the next slide, Karen, for representing personal perspective and meaning. The word sage comes from salvio, which gives us the word sal, which actually means I am well. And I like that. And in my mind, that goes back to the idea of being an integer. We are whole. We are enough in our entirety. We are not fractioned. We are not split off. So a little herbal lore that I think helps support the idea of personal perspective and meaning. How do we cultivate it if we don't think that that's something that is within us or within us to the degree that we would like? Is assessing your personal values. Are you living in concert or conflict with them? And just a personal story, and I remember this. I remember where I was. I remember who I was with. This was in 2006. And I was at a dinner party, and it dawned on me that my life had gotten off track in a lot of really significant ways. And what happened after that was really scary, in that I changed a great many things, but it was also really exhilarating, because I realized that I had allowed my life to go in a direction that just was not congruent with my personal values, and I wanted to make the necessary changes to get it back on track. And it was a hard but exciting and ultimately really rewarding time for me. Questioning old beliefs. We do that in the garden all the time. What worked last year doesn't necessarily work this year. Or what we read about in a gardening magazine by somebody who gardens in Kansas may turn out not to work. How many times do we buy a plant that has a little tag on it that says plant in full sun? Well, full sun in Austin, Texas is often not what is meant by full sun. So questioning old beliefs. Fostering altruism, and some of you have mentioned this. I work primarily with people who are bereaved in my sort of day job. And one of the really interesting things that comes out of the research is, of course, being bereaved, and most of us have had an experience of profound bereavement. You have nothing left to give. That's one of the characteristics of bereavement. But in spite of that, when bereaved people can find something in themselves to give away, some small act of kindness to another person or to a cause, it actually has really a more than you would think significance in terms of impacting a person's bereavement. So it's really it's very mysterious. Why at the time of your life when you have little to nothing left to give, still finding a way to do that has positive outcome for people. So we'll talk more about altruism in a minute. Include meaning and values in your assessment of strengths. You talked earlier, you shared in the chat, a strength that you have that starts with the same letter as your first name. Think about what you wrote and say, how do your values reflect that, or do they? And are there places where you need to make shifts or changes? And of course, and gosh, I find this hard, maybe other people don't, but discarding activities that are not coherent with our values. Because I don't know why, we've always done that. Other people expect it of us. It's somewhere along the line just became a habit that we never really reflected on. I don't know. But thinking about where do I spend my time, and is that really where I want to spend my time? Why am I doing these things? And perhaps it's time to change, or it's time to stop. Those of you who get the Austin American Statesman saw just last week a very interesting article about altruism and what the benefits are for the people who are. And altruism, of course, it's giving, but it's giving with no expectation of anything in return. Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. That's a really good point. So generosity and happiness, as one of the researchers said in that article, is clearly linked in the research. And I think that this is something that the Austin Herb Society really helps to foster, really helps to facilitate, is the notion of altruism. That's what we are about, is about sharing our knowledge. I know in the early meetings that I attended, I was so fascinated that the back table is where people just left stuff to give away. And I couldn't believe it. People were just like bringing stuff. They weren't selling it, they weren't trading it. They just left stuff out there for people to take if they wanted it. And indeed, that's what we do at the Austin Herb Society. We give of our knowledge, our time, in the garden, our garden at Zilker, our talents with one another. We give seeds, we give cuttings, we give food, we give crafts. I know, I agree with you, the back table is something I miss the most. Obviously we give herbs. Sometimes people bring flowers. They might bring, bounty from the garden, like fruits and vegetables and so forth. And going back to Austin Herb Society, we know that giving is most rewarding when it's linked with a social connection. So when we're at the meeting and we're dropping off, cuttings of something that we have a lot of, or we can speak with the person that we just shared some information with or a craft with, the benefit to us is even greater than when we, not that we don't do it, but you send a donation off to an organization that you support. The benefit's a little bit less without that social connection. I want to introduce you, if you don't know this comedian, Michael Jr. is an inspirational comedian that you may have seen on some of the late night shows. And I think this is a beautiful, beautiful example of finding your why. Why do we do the things that we do? So Karen, hit that.
This is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know? The next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour, hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know what I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
Is there a little more of that, Karen? Because I think he wraps it up really well.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
Thank you for that. All right. Well, so we
Just call
invite
it, how do I know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase,
you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to ask you to just share, to reflect on that a little bit and tell us in the chat box, why do you garden? Why do you garden? Why is that a priority for you? Interested in your responses. Okay. So beauty, restoration, creativity, peace of mind, beauty, feeling good, fundamental, peace and happiness, feeling complete. No, it's interesting to me. This was not a hard question for a lot of you to answer. The answers came quickly and are pretty robust. For food, because of the benefit, the practical benefit. Yeah. So as Michael Jr. might suggest, that when we know our why for gardening, that gives us a better idea as to the what. One of the values, just the personal values of, for me, even though it's relatively small, I feel like pioneer woman when I run out to my garden and pluck some herb that I need for a recipe. That's like enormously satisfying that I can provide for myself. So for me, herb gardening makes more sense than raising flowers, for example. As much as I love flowers and as beautiful as they are to me, they don't feed my why in the same way that herbs do and vegetables do. Because I like being able to provide for myself in a practical way. So knowing your why helps to guide and predict your what, your gardening what. So our model has shared with you the 5 core elements of resiliency. And I think with this soup, butternut squash apple sage soup, thank you, Carla, for this, looks wonderful, that wraps up the 5 core elements. And I don't, Karen, do we have any time for Q&A or do we need to move along?
I think we should move along, but we'll have
Okay.
a way for people to send us questions if they need to.
Sure, and we can continue this conversation via email. That's my Garden Charms email. And Karen's contact information is on the next slide. Karen, there you go.
Yeah, and I wanted to tell you all how much Stephanie and I have really enjoyed doing this, and we would like to hear more from you. One of the things we'd really like to know is what practice you're going to put in place as part of being with us today for the Resilient Gardener. And like any good project, our project has a mascot, and it's a little gecko. And the Resiliency project had the gecko before Geico had the gecko. So if you will email me with any ideas about what you're going to do as a result of this presentation, any other books or pages that you want to recommend to the folks, you send those to me and you will get your very own gecko. And like Stephanie said, I think that the Austin Herb Society has certainly been a big part of my resiliency. It's really been an honor to be with you here today. And we're going to turn it back to Carla. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Wow. Thank you both for that really wonderful presentation. You really tied in a lot of important things for us, especially during these times. And y'all, please don't forget, you will be able to get all these slides and the recipes. So look for those soon on the website, or you'll get an email notice about them.